you did learn really well during your fellowship. I'm impressed. Okay, so good.
And then Paul, Rajesh was there, and he did a meta-analysis.
Oh God,
boom.
that's terrible.
Rajesh meta. Okay. Yeah.
All right, we're good. Sorry about the delay.
Okay. All right, take it away, Angus.
All right, Angus. Okay, if I go, or you want me to wait?
No, go right ahead, Chris.
Okay. Yep. We'll get Jeremy on because that's what I know everybody wants to hear, not my rantings and ravings. But anyway, I'm very pleased to introduce Jeremy Lacocque, who, thanks to Paul Pepe's approval, is now the newest Eagle, as he is joining our clan as the medical director of the San Francisco Fire Department. He is a previous EMS fellow. So he was in what Amelia and Vijay are doing now previously, and has since gone on to do great things as first the interim and now the full-time medical director of the San Francisco Fire Department. He takes over for Clement Ye, who is transitioning over to full-time Department of Emergency Medicine, Department of Emergency Management issues. So Jeremy is taking over for what Clement Ye was doing with San Francisco Fire. He's already made some amazing additions to the fire department, and has made a fantastic transition already, and so is a great new candidate to be a new Eagle. And then also at the same time as doing all that, had this publication just coming out this week, which Peter picked up on and invited him for this. So we're excited to hear about that. A warm welcome to Jeremy to not only Eaglettes, this group, but the full Eagles. And again, thanks to Paul Pepe's approval, we're gonna move you into the Eagles group. So welcome, Jeremy.
All right, thanks so much for the intro. All right, so we'll jump into the paper. Thanks again for having me here today. So the majority of the data diving for this was done while I was an EMS fellow. So part of our time, in addition to San Francisco, we spent in Alameda County with Carl Spohr. So this research comes from a mix of UCSF and Alameda County. And the paper is about pre-hospital post-ROSC blood pressure and associated neurologic outcome. So it was just published in the American Journal of Emergency Medicine last week. I did the research with Lee Siegel, who's one of the paramedics at the EMS agency in Alameda, and Carl Spohr, the medical director there. So as some background, as you know, about 350,000 people have out-of-hospital cardiac arrest every year, and about 20–30% get return of spontaneous circulation. More than half of those, unfortunately, die in the hospital. There's a lot of attention spent on research and quality improvement around cardiac arrest itself in the pre-hospital setting, but not as much around post-ROSC care. Again, especially in the pre-hospital setting. A lot of hospitals in the emergency department have various protocols and foci, but not as much in the pre-hospital setting. So, we were kind of wondering in developing this study, what ways can we maximize the pre-hospital, post-ROSC care to maximize favorable patient outcomes? So one potential target is focusing on the blood pressure. Does blood pressure right after ROSC correlate with neurologic outcome, and does maximizing that blood pressure have any potential? So most research to date focuses on vasopressors and hypotension in the emergency room or in the ICU, but very few studies, if any, that we could find focused on hypotension in the pre-hospital setting. So it was our intention to look at that. So we wanted to investigate the relationship between hypotension and neurologic outcome in adults with ROSC and out-of-hospital cardiac arrest. So this is a protocol in Alameda County. They did have a protocol for post-ROSC. So, in the beginning, it's supportive care, ABCs, make sure you titrate oxygen, end-tidal CO2, 12-lead glucose, and then it goes on to treat not hypotensive, so that you just monitor the patient, and hypotensive with a normal pulse, you give a fluid challenge and then consider push-dose epinephrine. In the beginning of the study, dopamine was the vasopressor of choice, and then they switched to push-dose epinephrine. And then for bradycardia, atropine, pacing, and then eventually epi if that doesn't work. So that's the protocol that the medics followed throughout the study. So in an 18-month span, we looked at 781 patients who had ROSC with after having CPR done in Alameda County. We looked at the transporting agency data, including what drugs they gave and the first and last blood pressure that was recorded. Unfortunately, with the way that the data was mined and kept over the years, we didn't have any blood pressures other than the first one and the last one recorded by the crew. We linked that PCR data with the CARES database, which, as you know, includes the neurologic outcome recorded as a CPC score. And then we use multivariate regression to compare the hypotensive patients with the not hypotensive patients and compared it with the neurologic outcome after controlling for several other confounding variables. So this is our chart. About 1,800 patients had CPR performed on them in cardiac arrest. So we, that number doesn't include the DOAs and everything. 781 had ROSC, 107 were hypotensive, 674 had a blood pressure systolic above 90. And of the hypotensive group, 61 got vasopressors and 46 did not. And the CARES database, again, we looked at the cerebral performance category, the CPC score, and we said 1 and 2 are a favorable, good neurologic outcome. So this is all of our data. The big thing I just want to highlight here is the things we attempted to control for. So we had sex, race. This was kind of the thing we were excited to see, the systolic of hypotensive or not hypotensive, vasopressor use, and then initial rhythm, bystander and CPR, first responder arrival, mechanical CPR or manual CPR, and then airway. So we attempted to control for all those things. And so basically we found after controlling for those things, patients who were hypotensive with a final blood pressure of less than 90 had an increased association with poor neurologic outcome. So 23% of patients who were not hypotensive had a good outcome, neurologic outcome, compared to about 10% of hypotensive patients. So about twice as many good outcomes with the not hypotensive group. Of the 11 hypotensive patients that did have a good outcome, 5 of those got vasopressors, all of which happened to be dopamine. And hypotensive patients who were treated with either vasopressor versus those who were hypotensive and not treated with vasopressors had no significant difference. So we found that hypotensive people with vasopressors and hypotensive people without vasopressors had similar outcomes. So vasopressors didn't significantly affect neurologic outcome for hypotensive patients. And we're thinking that's a reflection of the fact that the patient was likely in cardiogenic shock, maybe had a prolonged downtime, which is a poor prognosticator in and of itself. So whether we fix that hypotension or not, the patient still has a poor prognosis. A large limitation for us was only having the first and last blood pressure. So there was no dynamic data available. We would have loved to see, this is the blood pressure right after ROSC, and then we gave fluids, and then we gave a vasopressor, and this is what happened with blood pressure. But unfortunately, we didn't have that dynamic data. So we just had the last blood pressure, and we assumed that that was the post-ROSC blood pressure because everyone had ROSC, and if they had a blood pressure, it was after ROSC. So that's how we treated the numbers. So we don't actually know if the vasopressors affected the blood pressure or not. We assume we did, but again, we didn't have the data to support that. And 43% of the hypotensive patients didn't get vasopressors. So that could have been for a lot of reasons. It could have been because they got fluid, and by the time they finished that fluid, their blood pressure was improving, or perhaps they got to the emergency room at that point. Obviously, there's a lot of work for paramedics to do after ROSC. There's EKGs and blood sugar and driving and packaging the patient and giving the ring down. So there's a lot of work to be done, and perhaps they just didn't get to that point of the algorithm, or perhaps, more importantly, perhaps it was a missed opportunity. Maybe they were hypotensive, and for whatever reason, they didn't give vasopressors. So perhaps it was a missed opportunity. So basically, we concluded that previous studies looked at hypotension, the emergency department and ICU, but not many looked at the pre-hospital hypotension as a prognosticator. We found that pre-hospital hypotension was associated with a poor neurologic outcome, and there was no significant difference in neuro outcome in hypotensive patients versus those who got vasopressors. So pre-hospital vasopressors may not affect neurologic outcome. So we need to study this more with more patients so that we have better data on the hypotensive end and who got vasopressors. And ideally, if we were to do this again, we'd have more dynamic data and include more than just blood pressure. Also include end-tidal CO2 and pulse oximetry and all the other interesting data points that go with cardiac arrest. So thanks so much for having me. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Jeremy, this is Peter. Thank you. Great presentation. My question for you is that this reminds me a lot of the EPIC for TBI trial, where any episode of hypoxia and any episode of hypotension led to significant morbidity and mortality in those patients. And I wonder, is the same physiologic mechanism at play here? I wonder if you have any comment on that.
I'm really sorry, but I got a phone call at the same time, so I missed the first part of your question.
No, okay, I'll repeat it. The study that was done out of Phoenix, the EPIC for TBI trial done by Ben Barbaro and Dan Spade, they found a significant increase in morbidity mortality with severe TBI when there was either an episode of hypoxia and or an episode of hypotension. And when you added in the hypotension, I think it was like a 17-fold worse outcome, if I'm remembering correctly. And I'm wondering if the same physiologic mechanisms are at play here, even though there's no TBI involved.
Yeah, I think the common denominator there is hypotension is poor cerebral perfusion. If for whatever reason you get poor perfusion in your brain, obviously it's hard to come back from that. Poor perfusion in the brain, poor neurologic outcome. I think that's the common denominator here, as you're highlighting.
Peter, may I make a point? So physiologically speaking, this is something that Peter Saffer and I were looking at back in the 70s and 80s, and you're on target about how important this is. That hypotension is a marker for the physiological state. A lot of people think of a CPR state as being this static, thing. You're always the same physiology, but when you go into cardiac arrest, you have vascular tone. Right now, each one of us has blood pressure, and our heart's pumping out against some resistance, and it creates the blood pressure that perfuses the coronary arteries. Over the course of several minutes, the oxygen is not getting out to that peripheral vasculature, and so as a result, you kind of get into peripheral vascular relaxation. If your heart now is starting to beat again, and it's pumping out against empty pipes, and it doesn't generate it. It just is a marker for being down a long time. The CPR and the pressors, the way we give them, by the way, that's another issue, are ineffective under those circumstances. What we really need to do is restore better flow, which we've now started to do with some of the head-up CPR, ITD, and all those kinds of things we learned about this past weekend. So, and I'm going to tell you that 15 minutes, in that first 15 minutes after resuscitation, is the key thing for the outcomes and sustaining it. And so, anyways, this is just really another great piece of work that actually emphasizes that if you've been down a long time, you're not going to do well. So that, so thank you so much.
Paul, is there anything you didn't study in the 70s and 80s?
Well, I didn't know anything about like Lady Gaga and things like that. So I didn't learn those until later on. Okay, so
well, you didn't study droperidol or ketamine in the 70s either, which I take offense to.
Yeah, I know, exactly right. I don't think they existed yet, did they? When I was around. No, but anyways, thank you though. The one thing I did study very well was best places to eat in San Francisco. So we can talk later.
Jeremy, I have a question related to Paul's point. Is do you have any timing of when those vasopressors were given post ROSC?
Yeah, even when we had like the time of administration, we didn't know when that was in relation to the time of arrest or time of ROSC. The data that we were able to pull out of the charts was limited, and it's just based on the way that the EMS agency like stores and collects that data for quality improvement. To dig through that data and get what we really wanted again, we'd have to look through every PCR individually, and obviously there's time limitations to that. So we did not have that dynamic data.
But Peter, I think the time to pressure is not as much as important as how long they were down and not getting perfect. And so this is just a marker post resuscitation. Heart started, it just can't beat. It's not beating against. It's what beating against wide open pipes, as I was saying before, and I think that's what it is. And you've seen done thing in the laboratory now with Keith, etc. You've seen how with CPR alone, the cerebral perfusion is low. Okay. Okay, hey,
I'm not sure if oh, there you are.
I am call coming in and knocked me out, so I apologize.
Oh, okay.
I forgot where
Yeah.
I left off, but I was just saying is that it's the timeout, and you can't. And we showed in the, I know we showed in the lab you've seen those doing the head up versus active compression and ITD versus all three with the head up together versus just standard CPR. I mean, you don't have very good cerebral perfusion pressure to begin with, going right away, and then it really falls off over the next 5 minutes. They just really probably don't have a prayer unless you're reperfusing them, like Kerry out there and keeping people alive and waking up before they even get out of ventricular fibrillation, right?
So speaking of Carrie, you want to make a comment? Welcome, by the way.
Hey, we can't hear you, Kerry. Just so you know, you're muted or something. Maybe that's purposeful. Who knows? While we're waiting for Kerry to get on, it's 11. Just remember, it's 129.83 is the CME number for today. 129.83. Okay. Kerry, on yet?
No.
Anyways, whatever he says, it's okay.
He's there and he's unmuted, but we can't hear him. So
Got it.
Oh, that's a bummer. Any other comments or thoughts on this?
No, but thanks for doing the work. This kind of things we need people to pay attention. And the best thing is be on the streets with them and watch what happens. You'll totally understand this. It's really cool. And then the other thing we are looking at, I think we discussed at the other meeting, was what Jim Roach is doing down here in Florida, is with the epi drips, that kind of thing, to maintain it so you're not bolusing things. Okay, let's just go. Yeah, exactly right. That's right. Mean arterial pressure, right? Is that what's the first one? Go AL. What was the top thing? Not sure if I can understand that one. We've been talking about.
Type it in the chat, Kerry, if you.
Yeah. Okay. And looking at the map, especially in future studies, which I hope is the case, because that was a really good talk that what's the deal? Oh, head up. That's probably what it is. After
Okay.
maybe that's what it is. Right?
So Paul and Jeremy, I also don't want people to leave this talk thinking that we shouldn't be maximizing blood pressure post ROSC either, right? I mean, that's not the takeaway here. Anyone want to comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, my takeaway from this is we know hypotension is bad. This kind of confirmed it in the pre-hospital setting, which is kind of the newer part of the data here. And then in terms of vasopressors, I think it's an interesting finding, but I wouldn't change my practice based on it. And I think we need more patients and better data to make a more confident decision. But I do think it's interesting that there wasn't a clear benefit. But again, transport times aren't that long in Alameda County, so it's really hard to see the effects of these things.
So I'm going to see if I can make an interpretation. What I think Kerry was trying to say is that when you're head up CPR, you can't do it if it's hypotensive, if the MAP is low, and but the whole point is if you do that performance of CPR and the head up and whatever all those things is that eventually you get much better perfusion and you'll be in a better state at the time it happens. So anyways, hopefully he'll straighten this out maybe next week or later on the next call. So I feel like that's all. Hear what he had to say.
So
Paul,
yeah. Didn't that come out during the meeting that you shouldn't go into the heads up position until you had a MAP of 70? Is that what came out?
Yeah. But what I'm saying is concentrate before you get ROSC, concentrate on doing the better flow, and you'll be better off once you get them back, that kind of thing. And then that head up if you have a good MAP. If you don't, that's a problem.
Is Keith recommending not to go ahead? I mean, obviously you guys are going heads up prior to ROSC, right?
Right.
So how did that impact brain flow?
Well, the thing is, like the cases we had last week, for example, even here in the state of Florida with Kerry, is these guys are waking up before they even get ROSC back. I mean, or at least coming around, and that's the advantage. That's the whole thing, is that this is a whole new dynamic. In the past, we just had basic CPR, even with mechanical CPR, it just wasn't as good as increasing flow and getting oxygen out to those peripheral vascular sites. That's all.
Yeah, it sure seems like there's two pieces to it. There's the initial brain injury, which whether it's traumatic or from the cardiac arrest, that you can mitigate. But then there's an injured brain really does not like hypoperfusion in the post-ROSC phase.
Yeah. Absolutely. But I'm not sure if that's more of a marker than it is a determinant of the outcome. That's all.
Yeah. Hey Peter, I'm going to put a poll in the FAEMSMD right now about what post-ROSC vasopressor people are using in their protocols. I thought it was interesting that he was using dopamine. We can't even get dopamine here anymore. We've been on Levophed for a while. So I'm curious between epi, Levophed, and dopamine what people are using. I'm going to put that poll up right now.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think Jeremy said you said that you switched over to push pressor, right?
Yeah, they switched from dopamine to push dose epinephrine about halfway through.
But I thought I heard you say that everybody in the group got dopamine.
Everyone that was hypotensive that got a vasopressor that had a good outcome happened to get dopamine.
Oh, that's very interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
That was an interesting signal. I mean, the question is that a signal or just random, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was only 11 people, so again, the number isn't very high, but it definitely was interesting. We noticed the number of people that got push dose epinephrine, even though it was an option for a long period of time, wasn't very high, and so it's hard to know, like, maybe there wasn't a lot of opportunity, maybe there was just less familiar, people were afraid to use it, it was harder to mix, who knows.
Interesting.
Cool.
The last question I had is, do you know how many doses, or is there an average number?
The great work on the Twitter stuff, man.
Patients, did you have that?
That's just copy and paste. That's all right.
Jeremy.
Sorry, there's some overlapping audio, so I didn't hear the end of your question.
Yeah, no, I was just wondering, in the folks who ended up getting ROSC, did you have the number of doses of epi that they received versus those who didn't get ROSC? Like, in other words, just the quantity of epinephrine administered is also something that a lot of people are grappling with
Right.
the pre-hospital region.
Yeah, it makes me think of the Paramedic 2 trial, which I mentioned briefly in my paper. I think I believe we do have the data as to how many doses of resuscitation dose epinephrine they got, but it's not something we dug into.
Okay, got it. All right. Well, it's 11:28. I think it's good time for us to thank you. And Chris, do you want to make any last comments on droperidol, because you have a captive audience while you're here?
Before you go over, Chris, I got to get off. I was getting the other call, but is Ken on the call today? Do you know where he is? Is he available?
I don't know. I'm traveling today, so I
don't see Ken. I don't see Ken on the call here.
Well, I think he's out of town.
I think so too. Okay,
guys.
yeah,
he is.
I'll see you over there on the other end. Okay, take care. Bye-bye. Okay. Thank you. Great job today. Jeremy, welcome to the club. Chris, leave it to you, buddy. See you later.
All right.
Thanks.
Thanks everybody. Jeremy, awesome job. And I don't know, do you have the link to the next the meeting, Jeremy?
I do not.
All right, I'll send it to you, and we'll get you on to introduce you to Eagles. So anyway, awesome job. Thank you for doing that, and thanks everybody for having all of us on.
All right, thanks, Chris.
Yeah, well,
and
appreciate you
Jeremy.
guys coming on, and we appreciate it. Angus, thank you so much. And Angus, you're going to take everyone over to the Eagles, I presume?